Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Greeley, Colorado is a quaint town, nestled in front of a beautiful mountain range and located just an hour from the state capital of Denver. What was once designed as a religiously oriented utopian community focused on farming back in 1869 is now home to over 100,000 people. One of which, in February 2020, was 53-year-old Stanley Scott Sessions. Scott was loved around town and was a fixture in the community. He played the trumpet and was actively a part of 2 bands that toured all over Colorado, the Movers and Shakers and George Gray and the Elvis Experience. He also ran a local painting business and enjoyed the outdoors with his dog, Molly. So friends found it weird when on the evening of February 10th, Scott failed to show up to a scheduled performance with George Gray and the Elvis Experience. They soon discovered he hadn't been heard from since February 8th, when he called his father, Stanley Sessions, to let him know he was on his way to a friend's house. Not hearing from Scott was completely out of character. Although he didn't have a family of his own, he always kept in close contact with friends, and especially his bandmates. Something was wrong. At around the same time, miles away from the event venue, the Larimer County Sheriff's Office was puzzled. Earlier that morning, on February 10th, around 9:30 a.m., the body of a man was discovered near Bellevue, Colorado, a full 50 minutes away from Greeley. A snowplow operator had discovered the body on his morning route. It was 19 degrees outside. The body was wrapped in plastic. It had been burned, and a leg was missing. It was still smoldering when the snowplow operator got out of his vehicle to check out the scene. He immediately reported it to police. The following day, on February 11th, both George Gray and Scott's father, Stanley, went to Scott's house in Greeley. It was obvious he hadn't been home in several days. They immediately reported him missing. This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 213, part 1. It took all of one day for the Larimer County Sheriff's Office to confirm that the body found by the snowplow driver near Bellevue, in a park area in the scenic Poudre Canyon, was Scott Sessions. But why and how did Scott get there? When investigators went out to the canyon, they scoured the scene for clues. Larimer County investigator and criminalist, Deputy Daniel Gilliam, was one of the first officers to arrive. He assisted in moving Scott's body from the crime scene.
Can you generally describe your initial observations when you got there?
Several investigators, patrol officers, the coroner's investigator. There was a path that I was shown that had been established to the location where the victim was. Victim was face down on the ground with a log next to him. The log was still smoldering. The right leg was missing from being burned through. Covered in snow primarily, hard to see. Left hand was The arm was extended 90 degrees out, and then the elbow was bent so that the left palm was down on the ground. And then the right palm, as I recall, or the right hand, could barely be seen between him and the log.
He also noticed tire tracks and footprints in the snow. It appeared as though a vehicle had backed up into the area where Scott was found. He briefly documented both tracks, and officers flew a drone over the scene. It was snowing that day, and the clock was ticking for officers to notate everything in time before fresh snow blanketed the area. On February 13th, another snowplow blew through, obliterating the crime scene. When investigators returned, they tried to salvage what tracks were left. They used an air compressor to blow away light snowfall and cast some of the footprints and tracks that were remaining. Dr. James Wilkerson IV, the medical examiner who performed Scott's autopsy and who eventually took the stand in this case, testified that Scott was attacked from behind and had signs of defensive wounds on his body. A large cut had been made across the right side of his neck, nearly decapitating him. He had been severely burned. His lower half was almost torn apart. His body had been wrapped in plastic, and his head was covered with an additional blue cloth secured around his neck with duct tape. Investigators were granted permission into Scott's home by his father. Nothing pivotal turned up during the search. The house looked normal, no signs of an attack or a struggle. But before they called off the search, investigators stumbled upon Scott's computer. He had neatly written out various passwords for websites onto a piece of paper near the computer. Investigators decided to log into Scott's Facebook account to see if any clues could be found about his current location. Immediately, they noticed a string of messages between Scott and a woman named Heather Frank. According to the messages, the two were set to meet up at Heather's apartment on the night of February 8th, the last night anyone spoke to Scott. Heather Frank was a 48-year-old Greeley resident. She was a mother to 3 boys and worked as a manager at Doug's Day Diner in Loveland, Colorado, just 30 minutes outside of Greeley. To investigators, it appeared as though Scott and Heather were in the beginnings of a romantic relationship, primarily over Facebook, exchanging flirty messages back and forth. They had met earlier that year at a blues concert. Shortly afterwards, they connected on Facebook. On February 8th, Heather messaged Scott and invited him over to her apartment for the evening. Scott responded and offered to bring alcohol over. This was the location investigators believed he had been driving to when he called his father for the last time. Now investigators had quite a lead. But did Heather Frank have anything to do with Scott's mysterious death? On February 12, 2020, Sheriff's Deputy Tyler Thomas was assigned to find Scott Sessions' vehicle, which was still missing. He was given the last known coordinates from Scott's cell phone. He located the car at a local grocery store in Greeley called King Soopers.
Was there anything unusual that you found outside of the vehicle or not underneath the vehicle?
So while taking photographs of the vehicle to document how I found it, I noticed, 1, the vehicle was unlocked, and 2, that the floor mat for what appeared to be the driver's side was directly underneath the vehicle on the driver's side of the vehicle.
Okay. When you say underneath it, was it underneath the vehicle or just outside of the vehicle as somebody would step out onto it?
So it was actually underneath the vehicle. After the vehicle was towed, you could see where there was impressions from where it had frozen to the ground underneath the vehicle. So actually physically under the vehicle and not to the side.
The car was towed away by the sheriff's office. Investigators searched various other businesses that lined the street to see if their surveillance cameras had caught anything between February 11th and 12th. Many businesses had broken cameras or couldn't provide the sheriff's office with the necessary dates, except for the grocery store, King Soopers. Deputy Thomas obtained the footage, which showed a lone male parking Scott's car on February 11th, one day after Scott's body had been discovered. The man never returned. A sergeant from the investigations unit of the Larimer County Sheriff's Department, Donnie Robbins, was also placed on the case. After Scott's body was identified, Sergeant Robbins was instructed to submit a search warrant for his phone, requesting call detail records from the service provider. Meanwhile, investigators obtained the address of Heather Frank's apartment, which was oddly close to the location where Scott's vehicle was recovered. On February 14th, Sergeant Robbins and other officers drove to Heather's apartment and observed two vehicles, a red Ford Fusion, which was registered to Heather, and a silver Subaru Crosstrek, which was registered to a man named Kevin Eastman. Sergeant Robbins submitted a request for tracking devices to be placed on both vehicles, which was done later that day. The GPS devices attached to the undersides of the vehicles with magnets, unbeknownst to the drivers. Sergeant Robbins also ordered a surveillance camera to be placed outside of Heather's apartment on the 14th as well. The live feed from the camera could be watched by police to monitor Heather and Kevin remotely. Active arrest warrants were also placed on each of them. On the evening of the 15th, Sergeant Robbins observed Heather and Kevin get into Kevin's Subaru and leave the apartment complex. The vehicle drove to a county property in Keur, Colorado, a 20-minute drive from Greeley. Sergeant Robbins had noticed that both Heather and Kevin's phones had been left inside the apartment. He decided to follow them. They would later discover that this Keur property belonged to a man named Troy Bonnell. But what, if anything, did this have to do with Scott Sessions' death? Troy Bonnell was a local businessman who owned a company called Bonnell Trucking. He had at one time offered Kevin a job as a mechanic. Kevin appeared to work for him on and off. Sergeant Robbins returned to Troy's property the next day, on February 16th. When he arrived, he noticed smoke rising from a point on the property off County Road 45. He parked on the side to watch. That's when he saw Kevin tending to a fire pit on the property. He was concerned that Kevin was potentially burning evidence that had to do with Scott's death. He would later testify in court, however, that no damning evidence was found there, or anywhere else they had tracked Heather and Kevin.
And to your knowledge, no evidence was found that substantiated your concern that the suspects were destroying evidence at those locations.
That's correct.
And you personally searched the area where the vehicle stopped at the bridge on County Road 61.
I did.
And you did not observe anything out of the ordinary.
I did not.
You located no potential evidence.
I did not.
Nothing that had been discarded.
That's correct.
As Sergeant Robbins made his way towards the part of the property where Kevin had been tending to the fire, he passed Kevin's Subaru heading in the opposite direction. He turned around and followed. He followed him to a local gas station, and as Kevin was filling up his gas tank, Sergeant Robbins placed him under arrest. A knife was found in Kevin's pocket, along with 5 rounds of ammo, 3 live rounds, and 2 spent casings. Kevin was taken into custody and transported to the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. When investigators looked into Kevin Eastman, they uncovered his own Facebook account, listed under a different name, Kevin Quintana. On his page, it showed that he had been in a relationship with Heather Frank since 2018. But investigators had another problem on their hands. They had now lost track of Heather. The last known sighting of her was on the surveillance camera leaving her apartment with Kevin on February 15th. But where was she now? Sergeant Robbins requested an immediate search warrant for the property on County Road 45. He had a gut instinct, and it wasn't good. Kevin Eastman was no stranger to run-ins with the police. He had faced charges in Greeley in 2015 for possession of a weapon by a previous offender, driving with a revoked license, driving while impaired, and 2 counts of third-degree assault causing injury. Kevin and Heather Frank had been in an on-again, off-again, tumultuous relationship. Heather's son eventually took the stand in the case and testified that the pair had begun dating in 2011. He said the relationship wasn't perfect and was called off several times.
Over that period of time to 2020, were there moments in time where they broke up?
Yes.
Approximately how many times did that happen?
I want to say at least twice.
He said that at some point during the couple's relationship, Kevin told him that he had been looking through Heather's phone and messages.
Did you respond to him when he told you that?
That it wasn't okay and that he should respect her privacy.
Not only was the relationship shaky, but Heather and Kevin often got into fights, resulting in alleged domestic violence. Kevin would later say in a police interview that his love for Heather was deep. He would sacrifice anything to be around her. He had even proposed 3 different times. Each time, she had said no. Heather's son described the relationship as toxic. He recalled on the stand seeing injuries on his mom and hearing about their domestic violence issues in 2014.
Can you tell the jury about the first time you knew the defendant had physically harmed your mother? Do you remember about the time frame that was?
Yes. It was in February of 2014. I'm not sure the exact date that it took place.
Can you describe for the jury, first of all, what injuries that you saw on your mother?
When I seen her, she had a slash in her throat, like a knife, like a cut in her throat. I believe it was her right side of her face was really beaten up, like really bad. It was black and blue. Her wrist had been broken, and it was in I don't know what you call it. One of those.
Like a sling?
Sling, yes.
The search warrant on the Bonnell property was executed immediately. Troy Bonnell and his then-girlfriend, Jennifer, told police that the previous night, when Sergeant Robbins had followed Kevin to the property, they had interacted briefly with him. They said he requested to store some of his belongings, including tools, in their garage, asked about future work opportunities, and then left. Troy and Jennifer then stayed inside the home the rest of the night and heard no commotion outside. They both said they had not seen Heather Frank that evening. Once the search warrant was signed, investigators began their search. They found Kevin's clothing and other items that they then sent off to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. This included a hoodie, eyeglasses, a key, melted plastic, recoil springs potentially from a firearm, and a burnt bed skirt. They eventually found Scott's blood and DNA on a pair of jeans believed to belong to Kevin. In the garage on the property, investigators found a lunchbox, also believed to belong to Kevin. Inside was a box of ammo, .22 caliber ammo. Only 45 of the 50 shells were left in the box. Then, the biggest discovery. An officer at the property was taking a break from the search to use the bathroom. During his break, he noticed an oddly placed picnic table. He walked over and lifted the table to discover the body of a female wrapped in plastic. Simultaneously, a search warrant was executed at Heather's apartment. It was evident that the entryway was the scene of Scott's death by the amount of blood found, soaked all the way through to the subfloor. Kevin Eastman was interviewed by police following his arrest on February 16. It lasted almost 4 hours. He shook hands with the detectives. They told him he had been pulled into the station for an outstanding warrant for domestic violence in Denver. They asked where he lived, and he began to tell them his life story from the past year. He called his living situation a little crazy and said he was currently residing in 3 different places, with his friend, Troy Bonnell, his girlfriend, Heather Frank, and his sister. He alleged that he had been living in various places after Valentine's Day in 2019. He said he had told his girlfriend, Heather, that they would need to stop drinking if they wanted to make their relationship work. He said she refused. He moved out in August 2019, and the couple broke up that December. Kevin said he and Heather had been through hell and back, but that he still loved her. All of this came pouring out with no prompts from the officers. They just sat back and listened. Kevin told them about being laid off from his job, about a suicide attempt after the breakup, and about his decision to live with his sister in another town. He explained that she allowed him to stay with her for a while on the promise that he would be sober and try to find another job. He said he lived there until a week prior to this police interview. He had broken a sacred rule of his sister's, no drinking. She had kicked him out and he had traveled back to Greeley with no money and no prospects. He said he stayed periodically with his friend Troy. Troy had given him a room in his basement in exchange for work at $500 a week. He told the officers that he was a great mechanic and carpenter. Days prior, on February 8th, he said he had gone to Heather's house to try to mend their relationship, to get back together. He even proposed. She said no and told him that he couldn't stay there that evening because she was about to go out on a date with a man named Scott. And there it was. As officers kept looping back to Heather's date with Scott, Kevin began to get more and more flustered. They asked him why his vehicle would have been seen driving up into a remote canyon and coming back down immediately after. They asked why all three phones, Kevin's, Heather's, and Scott's, would have pinged in the same location on the night of February 8th, the night Scott was last seen. They said he must have been beside himself to see Heather with another man. Kevin then said that Heather told him that Scott had raped her, but that she continued to see him.
I feel like I'm betraying the trust if I tell you.
Well, it's easier that you and I talk about it for when I go and talk to her and just say, hey, look, I heard that there was some sort of contact between you and this guy named Scott, and it was unwanted. And I leave it at that.
Yeah, he went over to her house. So I think that they've probably been seeing each other for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the question is who didn't want it? Was it her? Was it him?
Well, okay, she told me that she told him no, and he just kept going. And that he raped her.
Kevin said he felt bad for breaking her confidence, but that he wasn't sure how believable her story was.
So like I said, I don't know how believable that is, because why would you go back and see him after that? I mean, I wanted to, yeah. And would you?
That would be tough.
Yeah, she said just because she likes the blues. And I was like, I don't know.
And so she saw him again after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said she even took her boys to go see him after that. He was asked how that made him feel.
Because she takes her boys to make her feel safe.
No, that she's saying that this guy raped her.
If he actually did, or just that she's saying it.
I think that's that. I mean, that's like splitting hairs. I mean, how does that make you feel? She says that this guy raped her.
Well, it just didn't.
How does that make you feel?
I don't think that he actually did.
At one point, Kevin apologized for accusing Scott of assault, saying that he shouldn't speak ill of the dead.
And I feel bad speaking ill of the dead, right? That's not very polite.
There was just one problem. Officers had never revealed to him that Scott Sessions was dead.
Where did we find Scott? You said that you didn't want to speak ill of the dead. I told you that he was a missing person. Okay? You said that you didn't want to speak ill of the dead.
Right.
We found him the next day up the Keur Canyon in Pingree Park. Okay? We know that he was with you and Heather the night before at Heather's house. And then we found him on Monday in Pingree Park. Okay?
The detectives were turning up the heat on Kevin Eastman. They knew he, Heather Frank, and Scott Sessions had been together in Heather's house the night of February 8th. Kevin insisted that wasn't true. He assured the officers that he was really trying to think and rack his memory for information. He said that sometimes he has memory blackouts where he goes blank for several hours at a time and then snaps back into his body without any recollection of what happened. He insisted, "I don't remember, guys." The officers told him they had placed a GPS tracker on his car. They asked him where Heather was. Kevin kept insisting he didn't know anything, saying that Heather had gone missing before and even almost lost her job over it. Then the officers asked if Heather was the one who killed Scott. "Are you covering for Heather? Was she defending herself from this guy?"
Kevin, it's okay, you can tell us. Scott wasn't a good guy. I know that we don't want to talk ill about the dead, but you know what? It is what it is. Okay? Scott wasn't a good guy. Scott did something to Heather. That pissed you off. That pissed Heather off. Things went bad, and you guys had to clean it up. And we were that far away from knowing everything.
They showed Kevin messages between Heather and Scott, to which Kevin seemed to become visibly uncomfortable. Then they told him that Heather's body had been found on Troy Bonnell's property and that Troy was now cooperating with them. Kevin appeared to be in shock and said he couldn't believe Heather was dead. He then told them he had to keep his mouth shut because he had made a promise to someone. But eventually, he admitted to going over to Heather's house and seeing a mess in the entryway. This next part is a little hard to hear, but in it, Kevin says he has a weak stomach and hates the sight of blood.
I'm going to ask you a question. What room in Heather's house did this take part in? What room was Scott killed in?
I got no idea. No, it's...
What room were you in when you saw Scott's body?
I know what room. I know where at in the house the mess was at.
Okay, let's start there. Where was the mess at? Okay.
No, it's not, guys. I can't.
Was it a big mess? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a weak stomach.
Did you throw up?
Well,
It's okay if you did.
I tried multiple times in the sink.
Kevin said he saw Scott's body at Heather's house, that he hates the sight of blood and dry heaved into the sink, but he refused to tell them anything further. On February 18th, the female body found on Troy Bonnell's property was positively ID'd as Heather Frank. On February 24th, Kevin was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of tampering with a deceased body, 2 counts of tampering with evidence, and possession of a weapon on a previous charge. No bond was set. Despite 2 mental health evaluations requested by Kevin Eastman's counsel, he was deemed fit to stand trial. After several COVID delays, the trial started in the summer of 2022. Prosecutor Yvette Guthrie gave opening statements on behalf of the state.
Power, control, coercion, and revenge. At its very core, this case is about domestic violence.
She said Kevin was so intent on keeping Heather Frank for himself that 2 people ended up dead as a result of it. She displayed photos of Kevin's hands for the jury and said, "These are the hands of the murderer." But these hands left a trail of evidence, she said. She explained that despite Heather living a seemingly peaceful life, she was in the middle of a tumultuous on-again, off-again domestic violence relationship with Kevin, which eventually led to hers and Scott's deaths. She said Scott had no idea he was involved in such a dangerous situation. In December 2019, Heather and Kevin had another breakup. After that, Kevin took off to Parachute, Colorado to live with his sister. Guthrie argued that with Kevin out of the picture, Heather felt, for the first time, that perhaps she could move on with her life, this time for good. She said at the time of her death, Heather was moving on with Scott Sessions and was excited. Scott was a handsome, charismatic, 53-year-old who was a jazz musician. But the defendant was never far, she said, and on February 8th, Kevin showed back up in her life, uninvited, and caused everything to come crashing down. She said right around that time, Heather's Facebook account sent Scott a message and invited him to come over. Scott accepted.
What you're going to hear is that the evidence is going to suggest that Scott was, when he entered that apartment, was immediately killed right inside the entryway of that apartment.
She told the jury he was killed immediately as soon as he entered by the only person with a reason to kill him, the defendant. She said blood evidence wasn't the only evidence they had, but that cell phone GPS data would also prove their case. She said on February 8th, all 3 phones belonging to Heather, Kevin, and Scott pinged by cell towers near Heather's apartment for the entire night. The same phones, along with surveillance cameras, also showed the Subaru going up the canyon the next day, where she said Kevin dumped Scott's body. But she also told the jury that Heather, despite having witnessed her new love interest killed in the entryway of her home, did return to work and to normal activities in the days following, something she said a domestic violence expert would testify about later in the trial. And then she said Kevin, in a final act of domestic violence, killed Heather with 2 bullets to the chest. When it was their turn, the defense told the jury that the entire case was built on nothing more than a hunch.
An early hunch became an assumption on which this case was built. And rather than meaningfully test the accuracy of that initial hunch, investigators were blinded by the desperation to preserve it.
They said Kevin was completely innocent and was in fact just a victim in the whole situation. Attorney Samantha Devereaux said that Heather and Scott were not in love or even remotely near a relationship. While they were flirty at first, the tone of their messages soon changed after they hung out one night on January 24th or 25th.
Now, the tone of the Facebook conversation is important. The tone of the Facebook conversation from that point on changed. And it changed because from that point on, it no longer reflected mutual interest. The next day, after the two spent the evening together, Mr. Sessions tried to communicate with Ms. Frank. At 2:52 p.m., he messages her, quote, "What a super fun time last night. So," with multiple O's, nice, followed by 3 emojis. No response from Ms. Frank. About 6 hours later, at 8:15 that same day, Mr. Sessions tries again. Quote, "Hey, how you doing? Hope you got some good rest today and hopefully feeling good too," with 3 more emojis. No response from Ms. Frank. No response from Ms. Frank that day. No response from Ms. Frank on January 26th, on January 27th, on January 28th. No response from Ms. Frank at all. And in fact, almost 2 weeks go by, and Ms. Frank would not respond to Mr. Sessions.
She painted a picture of Heather trying to avoid Scott. She had attended a blues jam concert at which Scott performed, but Heather dodged him, instead attending the event with one of her sons. She said Scott didn't even know she was there.
Mr. Sessions made yet another attempt to get Miss Frank to respond to him. And he sent her a message on Facebook again on February 6th at 12:39 p.m. that reads, quote, "Hi, Heather. How was your last week? Missed seeing you yesterday at the Blues Jam. But I'd love to tell you about the trip to Memphis. It was really cool," with an emoji following. No response from Miss Frank. Approximately 2 hours later, Mr. Sessions persists again, and he sends her another message, this time to an event, another musical event at the Moxie Theater. And it was clear that this message was just sent to more than just Miss Frank. It was a general invitation to other people. 4 hours later, Mr. Sessions finally gets a response from Miss Frank. And she tells him that she was, in fact, at the Blues Jam, just not on the dance floor, and then changes the topic of conversation to posts she had seen on his Facebook about a recent trip to Memphis. But the response was brief. She does not acknowledge Scott Sessions' prior messages. She does not indicate that she also had a good time with him the evening of January 24th and 25th. She does not acknowledge that night at all. Nor does she indicate any interest in going to the event at the Moxie Theater on February 6th.
But Heather's uninterested tone changed 2 days later, she said, on February 8th.
On February 8th, Ms. Frank messages Mr. Sessions, quote, "Want to come over?" And Mr. Sessions immediately takes her up on this invitation. "Sure, I just need to hop in the shower. How about I send you a message when I'm out and throw on some clothes? Sound groovy?" And the once completely unresponsive Miss Frank is now eager for Mr. Sessions to come over to her residence. "Hurry," she says. And the conversation from there also reflects that alcohol had been consumed between the two of them the evening of January 24th and 25th.
Scott asked if they needed beer or if Heather had drank all the Crown. He agreed to bring beer over and then told her he was on his way, saying, "Warning, I smell pretty amazing."
Miss Frank planned for Mr. Sessions to come to her residence that evening. Miss Frank initiated Mr. Sessions to hurry up and come over, and Miss Frank was the one who waited for Mr. Sessions to come over.
Devereaux told the jury that Heather was actually the one who killed Scott. She explained that when Scott's body was found, his head was covered in a blue cloth that had been wrapped in plastic and secured with gray duct tape.
And when investigators were present at the autopsy, they did a very careful job of collecting that duct tape. And the reason for that was they wanted to know who was it that wrapped Mr. Sessions' head in duct tape before his body was burned. And the DNA on that duct tape was Miss Frank's.
She said at this point, Kevin was an unknown, irrelevant person to investigators. That changed when police noticed his car parked outside Heather's house and ran a check on his arrest record. With a previous charge related to domestic violence, investigators then ran with their hunch. Sure, she said Kevin and Heather had their share of problems, both normal and violent, but Kevin was incredibly forthcoming about his shortcomings. She said Kevin had proposed to Heather 3 times and had been rejected. She said that alcohol served as a catalyst in their toxic and volatile relationship. And she said, sure, Kevin had been abusive in the past, but he assured investigators that he had sought counseling.
But with this hunch, investigators requested cell phone records from both Mr. Eastman and Ms. Frank. And those phone records revealed that both Mr. Eastman and Ms. Frank phones were near her residence the entire afternoon of February 8th. And both of their phones were at Ms. Frank's residence when Mr. Sessions arrived around 6:26 p.m. And all 3 of their phones remained that evening. From the cell phone records, investigators also discovered that Mr. Eastman and Ms. Frank's phones left her residence at approximately 6:55 in the morning on February 9th. and traveled northwest in tandem to the remote area of LaPorte, Colorado, facing Ted's place. Both cell phones lost signal at approximately 7:52 a.m., and both cell phones reestablished connection approximately at 11:49 a.m. and traveled back to Miss Frank's residence again in tandem. That early hunch became an assumption on which this case was built. And that assumption was that Mr. Eastman was the type of person who was violent in the past with a partner, so he would be violent with anyone in the future. That assumption was that Mr. Eastman was the type of person who was abusive in the past, so he would be the type of person to be jealous in the future. And that assumption was that he must have been so irately jealous that Miss Frank had moved on to someone new that he slit someone's throat and took life.
She said that assumption was inaccurate and not based on actualities. She told the jury that Kevin loved Heather, even though she had infidelity issues, something she said Kevin came to terms with. He just wanted to be with her. He didn't care about the other men in her life. She said that at some point in the summer of 2019, Kevin decided to make a change for himself. He moved out of their shared apartment and got his own place. He began to focus on sobriety. He wanted to change for the better and win Heather over. That was until December 24th, 2019. Kevin lost his job. Heather broke up with him for the final time, and Kevin attempted suicide. His sister stepped in to help. She offered for Kevin to come live with her family in Parachute, over 4 hours away from Greeley. He took her up on the offer on January 5th, 2020. He made a promise to get sober and even agreed to keep the move from Heather so the two could really get time apart to work on themselves. She said Kevin told Heather that he moved to Arizona instead, but he ended up relapsing and going out to drink with his nephew, breaking his promise to his sister. She kicked him out. He returned to Greeley with nothing. He went to Heather's apartment to seek monetary help, unannounced at 2:22 p.m. on February 8th. She said Heather agreed to give him some money, but told him to give her his phone that she had once let him borrow. This, Devereaux argued, is how Kevin's phone's GPS showed that it was at her apartment all day and night on February 8th, even though she said Kevin wasn't there the whole time. Heather had told him that she had a date and that she needed him to leave, which he did. She said Kevin went to Troy Bonnell's house, leaving his cell phone at Heather's.
So when looking at the phone records that indicated Mr. Sessions, Mr. Eastman, and Ms. Frank were all at her residence all at the same time before Mr. Sessions was last heard from, of course, Mr. Eastman and Ms. Frank were the obvious suspects. And arrest warrants for both Mr. Eastman and Ms. Frank were issued by law enforcement.
She told the jury that Kevin returned to Heather's apartment on the night of the 8th. Heather had an interlock device on her vehicle, and Kevin feared that if she drank too much, she wouldn't be able to start her car in the morning. Kevin told investigators that Scott had already been killed prior to his arrival and that the apartment was a mess.
Torn between loyalty and the horror of what he saw and wanting to help police, Mr. Eastman told investigators that Mr. Sessions had to have been hurt somewhere pretty serious for the amount of blood he saw. He told investigators that there was, quote, blood every fucking where, as he struggled to breathe while telling them this. He also told investigators that when he saw the blood, he dry heaved over and over again because there was so much blood he couldn't stomach blood. The blood was also immediately upon entry, he tells them. And from there, he says, things just got out of control. And Mr. Eastman repeatedly tells investigators that he's sorry, he just can't tell them more, but he made a promise to someone.
Devereaux pointed out that after that night, Heather continued her life as normal, going to work, shopping, going out to dinner with one of her sons and his girlfriend, and getting her nails done.
So either Miss Frank witnessed or committed a gruesome homicide where a body was later burned and went on her day-to-day activities as normal.
She said on February 15th, the surveillance camera police had set up outside Heather's house captured Kevin and Heather leaving and getting into his car. They were carrying clothes, and she said the camera shows Heather walking on her own and not appearing to be in any kind of distress. The vehicle then left Heather's residence and went to Troy Bonnell's. The car made no stops, she said. From there, the car went to a location along the South Platte River. Sergeant Robbins was following, and although he didn't see anything, was suspicious that the two were destroying evidence. But instead of pulling the car over, he left them alone. Investigators later did a grid search there and found nothing. She pointed out that although Sergeant Robbins had assumed Kevin may have burned evidence in the burn pit at the Bonnell property, it too turned up empty when investigators combed through the ash. His assumption was again wrong, she said. She also told the jury that the search of Heather's home showed signs that she was preparing to flee.
Her bedding had been stripped. A large suitcase was found on the ground of her bedroom with clothes ready to go and her laptop nearby. And both her and Mr. Eastman's cell phones were left on the coffee table inside of her residence.
She said there was nothing suspicious found at Troy Bonnell's property except Heather's body, which she said was blamed on Kevin over an unreliable hunch. Despite all the evidence the prosecution claimed to have, she said there was still no proper explanation for Heather's death.
So at this point, we stand here today and over 2 years have passed. And investigators have limited information and many assumptions when it comes, and no answers when it comes to the death of Heather Frank. Investigators know Ms. Frank was killed by 2.22 long-range Remington brand bullets. But a tool marks examiner that they sent the request to examined one bullet recovered from Ms. Frank and the 22 casings located in Mr. Eastman's pocket. And she will tell you she is unable to determine if the recovered bullet from Ms. Frank matched the casings from Mr. Eastman's pocket. All she can say is that they're .22 caliber ammunition, and all she can tell you is that they're Remington brand. And she will also tell you that Remington brand is one of the four most largest brand companies to make these types of bullets, and they make billions of these bullets a year.
She said none of Kevin's fingerprints were found on the bullets or box of ammo located in the lunchbox from Troy's property, and only a very small amount of Kevin's DNA was found on Heather's body. And that was to be expected, she said.
That is all investigators knew, and that is all investigators know. Investigators have not, to this day, found where Miss Frank was killed. They know she was alive when she walked to and got into Mr. Eastman's car, and they know the car drove straight to Mr. Bonnell's property with no stops, no detours, but there was no sign of a murder at Mr. Bonnell's property. And Mr. Bonnell told investigators that he never saw Miss Frank, and he thought Mr. Eastman left the property as soon as he dropped off his tools. He also told investigators that he was up most of the night and didn't hear or see anything. And neither did his girlfriend, Jennifer Edmonds, who was staying the night with him.
She said investigators searched everywhere Kevin's vehicle had been and conducted 3 searches on Kevin's car, but they couldn't find where Heather had been murdered or find any other evidence to implicate Kevin.
Now, over, again, 2 years have passed since both deaths. Over 2 years of investigation, and the government will still not be able to show you any murder weapon. They will not be able to tell you where Miss Frank was killed, and they will not be able to present you with any forensic or physical evidence that connects Mr. Eastman to either homicide. And most consequential, after over 2 years of investigation across multiple law enforcement agencies, nearly 100 witnesses, expert witnesses spanning from lay witnesses to expert witnesses, with various forensic specialties. The government will not be able to provide or prove answers. Instead, the government will only be able to show a hunch that became an assumption. And because of this, you will have doubts. You will have hesitations. And because you have those doubts, because you have those hesitations, the only verdict will be not guilty.
So the prosecution believes that Kevin Eastman killed Scott Sessions because he was jealous of his relationship with Heather. And then they believe that sometime later, Kevin then killed Heather too. The defense says that Kevin had nothing to do with either death. They will argue that Heather actually murdered Scott herself. And not only will the defense argue that Kevin was also innocent of killing Heather, they have an alternative suspect in mind as well, one they said police overlooked. That next week in part 2.
Did you have any involvement in Heather Frank's death?
No.
Did you have any involvement in wrapping up her body in plastic and baling wire?
No.
Did you have any involvement in moving her deceased body at any point?
No.
And that's all for this episode. I really don't like to do 2-part episodes, especially that often, but sometimes there's just so much interesting information that comes out in these trials. It's just impossible to fit it all into just one. And this case is definitely that. This episode was researched and written by Law and Crime staff with additions by me. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at Court Junkie, on Twitter at Court Junkie Pod, and if you have any listener suggestions, please email those to podcast@courtjunkie.com and put listener suggestion in the subject line. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.